In the shadowed corridors of history, where myth and man entwine, some names echo with a chilling persistence. Among them, one stands out, a name synonymous with both righteous fury and unspeakable cruelty: Vlad the Impaler. To understand the man who would inspire the legend of Dracula, we must journey back to the turbulent heart of 15th century Wallachia, a land caught between empires, where survival demanded a will of iron and a heart of stone. This is not just a tale of a bloodthirsty tyrant. It is the story of a prince, a patriot, and a prisoner, forged in the crucible of war and betrayal. Vlad III was born into a world of conflict and divine right, a scion of the noble house of Dracula. His very name was a legacy of power and obligation. His father, Vlad II, was a formidable figure in his own right, a knight inducted into the prestigious and secretive Order of the Dragon. This chivalric order, founded by the Holy Roman Emperor, was sworn to defend Christendom against the encroaching might of the Ottoman Empire. For his membership, Vlad II was granted the epithet Dracula, meaning the dragon. Consequently, his son, Vlad III, became known as Dracula, the son of the dragon. A name that once signified a holy warrior would, over time, become twisted by his enemies into the devil. The son of the dragon's formative years were not spent in the comfort of a royal court, but in the gilded cage of his enemies. As a political guarantee of his father's fragile allegiance, a young Vlad and his younger brother Radu were sent as hostages to the Ottoman court of Sultan Murad II. It was here, amidst the splendor and brutality of the Adrianople palace, that Vlad's worldview was irrevocably shaped. He witnessed the absolute power of the Sultan, learned the intricate dance of Ottoman politics, and studied their advanced military tactics. This period of captivity was a masterclass in ruthlessness, instilling in him a deep-seated hatred for his captors and a profound understanding of the fear that could be wielded as a weapon. During Vlad's youth, his homeland of Wallachia was a cauldron of political instability, a pawn in the grand chess match between the Kingdom of Hungary and the ever-expanding Ottoman Empire. Local nobles, known as boyars, constantly vied for power, their loyalties shifting like the winds. The throne was a precarious seat, often claimed through assassination and betrayal. This constant turmoil, coupled with the relentless pressure from the Ottomans who sought to turn Wallachia into a vassal state, created a desperate need for a leader strong enough to impose order through any means necessary. Vlad's first grasp at power was as fleeting as it was violent. In 1448, with Hungarian support, he seized the opportunity to claim his birthright, launching a campaign to take the Wallachian throne. His reign, however, was brutally short. After only 2 months, he was driven out by a rival claimant backed by the Ottomans. This brief, bitter taste of authority only hardened his resolve. Defeated but not broken, he was forced into exile, a prince without a throne, biding his time, honing his strategies, and nursing a burning ambition to reclaim what was his. The stage was set for his return, a return that would drench the lands of Wallachia in blood and cement his name in infamy. He delved into the tumultuous early life of Vlad Dracula, a prince forged in the crucible of betrayal and imprisonment. Now we witness his transformation from a political pawn into a figure of absolute terrifying power. Welcome to our series on the historical Vlad the Impaler. This is episode 2, The Rise of the Impaler. In 1456, the political winds of Eastern Europe shifted once more. Backed by the formidable power of Hungary and its regent, John Hunyadi, Vlad Dracula marched back into Wallachia. This was not the desperate gamble of his youth, it was a calculated seizure of power. His rival, Vladislav II, fell in battle, and after years of exile and frustration, Vlad III finally secured the throne that he believed was his by birthright. He returned not just as a prince but as an instrument of vengeance, his heart hardened by years of loss and a burning desire to reclaim his father's legacy. The stage was set for a reign that would be written in blood. Vlad's first order of business was to settle a long-festering score. He had not forgotten the treacherous boyar families who had betrayed his father and brutally murdered his older brother Mircea by blinding him with red-hot pokers and burying him alive. On Easter Sunday, a day of supposed piety and celebration, Vlad invited the culpable nobles and their families to a grand feast in his capital, Targoviste. As the feast concluded, his soldiers surrounded the unsuspecting guests. The older boyars were immediately impaled on stakes erected outside the city walls. The younger, able-bodied men and women were condemned to a different fate. They were force-marched over 50 miles to the ruins of Poinari Castle, and compelled to rebuild it with their bare hands, a grueling task that claimed the lives of most. This brutal act, known as the Easter Day Massacre, sent a clear and horrifying message. Betrayal of the Dracula dynasty would be met with unforgiving retribution. With the old guard either dead or broken, Vlad moved swiftly to consolidate his authority over the fractious Wallachian nobility. He systematically purged any remaining dissenters, replacing the powerful established boyars with men of lower birth who owed their newfound status, and thus their loyalty, solely to him. This new class of loyalists formed the backbone of his administration. Allowing him to centralize power in a way no Wallachian prince had before, he seized the lands and wealth of his enemies, further strengthening his own position while weakening any potential rivals. Through a campaign of calculated terror and political restructuring, Vlad bent the turbulent aristocracy to his will, transforming Wallachia from a playground of feuding nobles into a state ruled by a single, absolute master. Beyond the nobility, Vlad sought to impose a rigid sense of order upon the entire populace, which had grown lawless and corrupt. He believed that only through extreme measures could he cleanse Wallachia of crime and dishonesty. He instituted a draconian legal code where theft, lying, or laziness could be punished by death. It was during this period that impalement, a horrific and excruciatingly slow method of execution, became his signature tool of justice and social control. The sight of bodies writhing on stakes became a common, grim spectacle, a public declaration of his intolerance for any form of disorder. The first instances of these mass impalements were designed for maximum psychological impact. Merchants who cheated customers, lazy peasants, and unchaste women were among the first to be hoisted onto sharpened poles. One famous, though likely embellished tale, tells of a golden cup left by a public fountain in Targoviste. Throughout Vlad's entire reign, the cup was never stolen, for the citizens knew the horrific punishment that awaited any thief. Whether through justice or sheer terror, Vlad was forging a new Wallachia, one defined by obedience and his own terrifying reputation. This was no longer just a prince, this was Vlad the Impaler. Vlad's brutal consolidation of power laid the groundwork for his ultimate ambition, to defy the Ottoman Empire. Join us in the next episode as we explore Dracula's holy war, a bloody crusade that would pit his small principality against the mightiest empire on earth, forever cementing his legendary status. In the turbulent theater of 15th century Eastern Europe, where empires clashed and loyalties were as fleeting as shadows, one man's name would soon be etched into history with blood and fear. Last time we witnessed the harrowing youth of Vlad III, a prince forged in the brutal crucible of Ottoman captivity. Now we chronicle his bloody return and the terrifying consolidation of a power that would make all of Wallachia tremble. After years of exile and a brief ill-fated taste of rule, 1456 marked the true beginning of Vlad's reign. Backed by the formidable might of Hungarian governor John Hunyadi, Vlad marched back into Wallachia, a land rife with betrayal and internal strife. His predecessor, Vladislav II, was slain in single combat, and Vlad once again seized the throne he believed was his birthright. This time, however, he would not be so easily unseated. He returned not as a boy prince, but as a hardened warrior with a memory as long and sharp as the spears of his soldiers. The stage was set for a reckoning that would wash over the Wallachian court in a tide of vengeance. Vlad's first order of business was to address the treacherous boyar families who had orchestrated his father's assassination and his older brother Mircha's horrific death, blinded with red-hot pokers and buried alive. His revenge was not merely political, it was deeply personal. On Easter Sunday of 1457, Vlad invited the unsuspecting boyars and their families to a grand feast at his court in Targoviste. In the midst of the celebration, his soldiers surrounded them. The elder nobles were immediately seized and impaled on stakes outside the city walls. The younger, more able-bodied men and women were condemned to a different fate, a forced march of over 50 miles to the ruins of Panari Castle, where they were enslaved to rebuild the fortress, many perishing from exhaustion under the lash. The Easter feast became a massacre, a chilling declaration that a new absolute master had arrived. With the old guard brutally purged, Vlad moved swiftly to consolidate his authority over the fractious Wallachian nobility. He systematically eliminated any source of internal dissent, replacing the powerful land-owning boyars with men of lower birth, loyal only to him. This new class of knights and officials owed their entire status to the prince, ensuring their unwavering obedience. Vlad centralized the state, seized control of trade, and built a formidable personal army, transforming Wallachia from a playground for competing nobles into a tightly controlled, unified state under his singular, iron-fisted will. He was not just a ruler, he was the absolute law. To cement this new order, Vlad instituted a draconian legal system aimed at eradicating the crime and corruption that had plagued the principality. He declared a war on theft, laziness, and dishonesty, with punishments designed to be as terrifying as they were final. While various forms of execution were employed, one method became his unmistakable signature: impalement. This gruesome, slow, and agonizing death was reserved for a wide range of offenses, from murder and robbery to adultery and lying. Vlad's justice was swift, public, and horrific, intended to serve as the ultimate deterrent. The first forests of the impaled soon began to rise across the Wallachian landscape. In one famous account, Vlad dealt with a group of Saxon merchants from Brasov who had defied his trade laws. He had them rounded up and impaled on the hills surrounding their own city, a grotesque warning visible to all who would challenge his economic policies. These gruesome spectacles were not random acts of cruelty, but calculated instruments of psychological warfare. They solidified his terrifying reputation, spreading fear far beyond his borders. The name Vlad Dracula was no longer just that of a prince. It was becoming a legend, whispered in horror by his enemies and in awe by his subjects. From the ashes of betrayal, a new order was born, founded on terror and absolute obedience. But as Vlad tightened his grip on Wallachia, a far greater storm was gathering on the horizon. The mighty Ottoman Empire, the very power that had once held him captive, would not ignore the rise of this defiant Christian prince for long. Join us next time as Vlad the Impaler turns his terrifying methods outward, facing the full wrath of Sultan Mehmed II in a desperate, bloody struggle for the soul of his nation. The echoes of his brother's screams and the shadow of his father's betrayal had haunted Vlad's exile for 8 long years. But in 1456, the winds of fortune shifted. Backed by the formidable might of Hungary and its regent John Hunyadi, Vlad Dracula marched back into Wallachia, not as a fugitive prince, but as a claimant ready to seize his birthright. His rival, Vladislav II, who had usurped the throne with Ottoman support, fell in single combat. The dragon had returned to its lair, and this time, he would not be so easily dislodged. Vlad, now voivode of Wallachia for the second time, was no longer the naive boy who had been driven from his home. He was a man forged in the crucible of loss and hardened by a singular burning desire: vengeance. His first target was the boyars, the wealthy noble families whose shifting allegiances had plunged Wallachia into chaos and cost his family everything. They had orchestrated his father's assassination and had buried his older brother Mircea, alive after blinding him with red-hot pokers. Vlad waited, his patience a coiled serpent. The moment came on Easter Sunday, a day of feasting and celebration. He invited the boyar families, hundreds of them, to a grand feast at his court in Targoviste. As they reveled, clad in their finest silks and velvets, Vlad's soldiers surrounded the hall. The doors were barred. The feast turned into a reckoning. The older boyars and their families, those directly complicit in the betrayal, were seized. According to the chronicles, they were marched out of the city and impaled on a forest of sharpened stakes, their death agonies serving as a grim monument to the price of treason. The younger, more able-bodied nobles and their families were spared the stake, but not Vlad's wrath. They were condemned to a different kind of hell. Chained together, they were force-marched over 50 miles through rugged terrain to the ruins of Ponari Castle, perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the Argeș River. There they were forced into slave labor, tasked with rebuilding the fortress that would become one of Vlad's most formidable strongholds. Many perished from exhaustion and starvation, their bodies left to rot where they fell. With this single horrific act, Vlad shattered the power of the old nobility, replacing them with men of lower birth, loyal only to him. With his internal enemies eliminated, Vlad turned his attention to the state of Wallachia itself. The land was rife with crime, corruption, and the lingering influence of the very boyars he had just purged. To restore order, he instituted a draconian system of law where even the slightest Impaler. The betrayal of his family, the murder of his father, the blinding of his brother. These were not wounds that time could heal for Vlad III. They were debts, and in 1456 he returned to Wallachia to collect. Backed by the military might of Hungary and its formidable regent John Hunyadi, Vlad seized the throne for the second time. This was not merely a political maneuver. It was the beginning of a reckoning. His brief ill-fated reign 8 years prior had taught him a bitter lesson. Power was not given but taken, and to hold it, one must be more ruthless than one's enemies. Now, as the voivode of Wallachia, he held the scepter, and his gaze turned inward toward the nest of vipers that had cost him everything, the boyar nobility. The storm broke on Easter Sunday, a day of supposed piety and celebration. Vlad, feigning a spirit of reconciliation, invited the boyar families to a grand feast at his court in Targovište. The very men and women who had conspired against his father and celebrated his demise. As the wine flowed and the festivities reached their peak, the doors were barred. The trap was sprung. In a swift, merciless purge, the older boyars and their families were rounded up. According to the chronicles, they were impaled on the spot, their bodies left to rot as a gruesome testament to the new order. The younger, able-bodied survivors were condemned to a different fate. They were force-marched over 50 miles to the ruins of Ponari Castle and conscripted into brutal, unending labor, tasked with rebuilding the fortress that would become Vlad's personal stronghold. The Easter feast became a massacre, a chilling message that loyalty was not a choice but a necessity for survival. With the old guard either dead or enslaved, Vlad moved to cement his authority over the fractured Wallachian landscape. He systematically dismantled the power of the remaining boyar factions, replacing them with men of lower birth, knights, and free peasants whose loyalty was to him and him alone. This new class of administrators owed their wealth and status directly to the voivode, ensuring they would act as extensions of his will rather than as potential rivals. Any whisper of dissent, any hint of conspiracy, was met with immediate and horrific retribution. Through this calculated campaign of terror and political restructuring, Vlad bent the turbulent nobility to his will, forging a centralized authority Wallachia had not seen in generations. He was no longer just a prince, he was the absolute master of his domain. To further consolidate his rule, Vlad sought to impose a brutal form of order upon a land rife with crime and corruption. He instituted a strict legal code where theft, dishonesty, and vagrancy were met with punishments of unimaginable cruelty. His methods were designed not just to punish the guilty, but to terrorize the entire populace into submission. The most infamous of these was impalement, a slow and agonizing method of execution that became inextricably linked to his name. Merchants who cheated customers, thieves caught in the act, and lazy beggars were all subject to this fate. Legends tell of a golden cup left in the main square of his capital, which no one dared to steal throughout his reign, a testament to the paralyzing fear his laws inspired. This was not justice in the modern sense, it was order, maintained through the sheer force of terror. The stakes driven through the earth around Targovište were not merely instruments of execution, they were pillars of his new regime. The first public impalement served as a horrifying spectacle and a powerful deterrent. Vlad often arranged his victims in geometric patterns, creating what became known as forests of the impaled. These grisly displays were placed along trade routes and outside city walls, ensuring that all who entered his lands, be they foreign envoys, Saxon merchants, or Ottoman scouts, would understand the price of defiance. The terrifying reputation of Vlad the Impaler was born from these fields of the dead. He ruled not through love or respect, but through a cold, calculated fear that etched his image into the annals of history as one of its most formidable and terrifying figures.